The Great War, through a London child's eye.
February 7th, 1918. Exciting news today, and for once it's not about the war. Parliament has decided that for the very first time, women shall have the right to vote in elections. Mother told me about the Suffragettes protest that she and Father saw in Whitehall back in 1913, before the war.
Suffragettes are women who campaign to get laws changed so that they could have a say in what happens in Parliament. There were hundreds of women on the protest march, many wearing the colours of the cause. Purple for dignity, white for purity, and green for hope. As they marched towards Parliament, they raised their banners and shouted.
Those are for men only!
Unfortunately, there were many men who weren't happy.
Get back in the kitchen.
They didn't like the idea of women speaking their mind.
Disgrace.
Suddenly, some of the women rushed forwards and began to throw bricks at shop windows. Policemen grabbed and hauled them away.
I'd asked Mother about it because she and Mrs. Parry had talked of barely nothing else for days.
You remember those protests, don't you, Mrs. Parry? Remember Emily Davidson throwing herself in front of the King's horse, killing herself for the cause? How things have changed.
In my opinion, I don't reckon she meant to die. But anyway, it's no good to me. I may have the age, but I don't have the property. So I'm no better off, am I?
So you still can't vote, even now the law's changed?
It's certainly progress, but only helps those women over the age of 30 who own property, whilst men may vote at a younger age regardless of their station in life.
They weren't as eager to find difference between us when the war needed our labour, though.
That's an undeniable truth, Mrs. Parry.
I don't suppose you knew, Edward, that when I was working in the munitions, I was only getting half the wages what the men did. And that includes some proper lazy old sods.
But isn't that because the men had families to support?
Who the devil do you think supports those without men folk? All those who've lost them. Plenty of those to go around. I reckon if the work is worth a shilling, then it shouldn't matter who's doing it.
I know it was thought women just weren't strong enough, or that the work was too difficult, or dangerous.
I was just as much at risk of getting blown up in the munitions. They were happy enough to have my hands at work then. I was so disappointed to leave the factory when the men came back. Charing might be quieter at work, but I was good at my job and it was satisfying work. And the money was good, even if it was half-inched.
Well, perhaps if the war did any good at all, it did show that women can work just as hard as men. Sometimes actions are louder than words.
Like Emily Davidson and that horse. A reckless act as maybe, but it created more of a stir than peaceful protests. Her actions certainly spoke louder than words. People were talking about it for weeks.
But breaking the law or causing damage can't ever be right, can it?
Well, no, but if you can't effect changes to the law because you don't have a vote, well, it drove some women to very drastic measures.
Ooh! Do you suppose we'll get a female member in the Houses of Parliament? There's a provision for that now.
One who's not carrying a tray of brandy for the men, you mean? Well, that would certainly be something. This law may at least open the door for further changes for the better. Perhaps you shall stand one day, Mrs. Parry. You'd have my vote.
Oh, hush. They'd not be able to get a word in edgeways.
It was strange to consider that it could well be the case I'd have a vote in matters of Parliament, things which affect my everyday life, before Mrs. Parry might. After all she'd done, it didn't seem fair. I hope, perhaps, it was the start of more changes for the better, for everyone.
The Great War, through a London child's eye. Supported by the National Lottery through the Heritage Lottery Fund. Read Edward's diary at funkitslive.com/Great War.